Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to show you, rather than walk you through the entire process, I'm just going to show you my code, not make you enter anything. Let's take a look at that first animation. So I created a project called Timer Animation Demo. And we're going to take a look at the storyboard. For hierarchy. So in the assets, I simply added Goose 1, Goose 2, Goose 3, and Goose 4. Now, I don't have 3 versions of them here, and that's okay. Swift will resize as necessary. It may not, on an iPad or something much larger, it may not look as nice. These are fairly small images. This is actually an animation I used to do when I taught Adobe Flash, so I just repurposed the geese. I was going to say gooses. In our storyboard then, I simply created an image view, and the properties for that image view was I set the image initially to Goose 1. And by the way, these images are 250 pixels by 155, and they're all set to be the exact same size. So that you see there's a bunch of blank space up here, and that's because as the goose flies, the wings come way up. So in Goose 4, the wings are going to be up here. Let me go back to the assets and talk about flight cycles in animation. Actually, let me go into Photoshop so we can see these a little bit larger. Okay, so here are the 4 geese. Goose 1, the wings are all the way down. They start to come up in Goose 2. They're a little more level in Goose 3, and then Goose 4 is all the way up. And there's a pretty big jump from here to here. Ideally, you might want to have a 5th one that's kind of that stage in between, get a little smoother animation. The more sprites there are, the smoother the animation will be, but the faster maybe the sequence will need to be. So in animation, we refer to animation cycles. And to have a character walk, we talk about a walk cycle, where the legs and the arms are moving, and the head is actually bobbing up and down a little bit in a walk cycle. When I put these together, I made sure that basically the eye was my reference point. So the eye of the goose never changes. It's pretty much always the exact same spot. The beak might move up and down. The wings move up and down. The legs could curl up or down. The tail feathers might come up or down. So, but the eye is going to be something that's always going to be constant in the flying goose. Now, the cycle is basically from this point all the way back to that point. And the cycle for the goose here is going to be Goose 1, Goose 2, Goose 3, Goose 4. Now I need to bring the wings back down. Goose 3, Goose 2. So there are 6 images in my cycle, but we repurpose Goose 2 and Goose 3. So it's always going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2. That's our cycle. And the wings will flap up and down. So let's look at how we did that then in Xcode. Okay, go back to my storyboard. So I have this image, and I set the size of it. Oh, I guess I didn't set the size. That was set to 255 by 155. That's really what it should be, 255, 155, just to be consistent with the size of the images. And then I simply animated that. So using a timer. So I've got some buttons. We'll come back and look at those. But I created a outlet for the goose. I named it IMG Goose. I also created an outlet for the view, because I want to know the size of the view, because when the goose gets all the way up to the right, I'm going to bring it back over to the left. So as it's flying, it's going to go off to the right and then come back in on the left, like maybe a second goose and a third goose. So I wanted to know what the size of the view is. So I used a outlet for that, and I just called it anim field, animation field. We'll come back and look at our pause button in a minute. Created a timer named Goose Timer. I created a integer variable called Goose anim IDX for index. You could just call it IDX, I suppose. And then I want to keep track of moving the goose along, because I don't want to just sit there and fly. There's different types of animations. One would be where the goose stays in the screen and things around it are moving. In this case, though, I want the goose just to fly off the screen as if the camera is stationary rather than the camera flying alongside the goose. And then I have my sequence. So this is going to be the sequence for the animation of the wings moving. So again, goose 1, goose 2, goose 3, goose 4, back to 3, back to 2. Just put that in an array. View did load. I create a function called new timer. And down here is new timer. This causes the animation. So again, I created goose timer, set it to a timer.scheduled-timer with an interval of 0.08, roughly 12 frames per second. That's a pretty good cartoon animation. It's sufficient. I'm gonna have a repeat forever, or I repeat, that's true. Then I have a delegate, or actually, in this case, a delegate, a closure. Goose timer in, and here's my function for that timer. Now I create a variable called ceiling. I don't want the goose to go fly too high, because we're gonna allow the user to have the goose go up or down. So I create a variable called ceiling and also one called floor. And here's where I use that animation field. I didn't want the goose to go below that, so I took the height, and in this case, the coordinates 0, 0 is going to be in the upper left-hand corner. So I took the height, and then I subtracted the height of the goose frame. So he wouldn't fly below the animation field. Here's where I animate the cycle. So I'm going to set that animation index equal to, and I'm going to check, I'm going to use a ternary here. If it's not equal to 5, got a little exclamation mark there, and so you can see it's this ternary. Let me just drag this a little bit better. So this is what I'm checking. If it's not equal to 5, then I'm going to set the animation index, or add 1 to that animation index, I should say. Otherwise, I'm going to set it to 0. So if it's 5, we're going to go back to 0. Remember, we have 6 elements: 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2. I'm going to set the image using UI image. It's going to be named, and here I'm going to take the goose sequence, and I'm going to get the animation index. That's the number we generated up here. So that goose sequence again is our array. That's going to tell it what to display in the image. Now that alone would just cause that goose to sit there and flap his wings. But we also want to move him forward. This is where it gets a little bit tricky, because I can't just use the X and Y of the goose. I've got to use that of the frame of the goose. And I took the frame and the origin dot X, and I simply incremented it by 15. So every time a new image comes up, he's going to move forward 15 units. Then I have a goose move Y here. Originally, when I did this, I set this to 0, and he'd just fly across the screen. But when we add in the ability to have him move up or down, I need a way of being able to figure out what that value should be. So I have that variable goose move Y that we created as an integer, actually as a CG float. When he gets all the way to the right, that's this next if structure here. So if the X element is greater than the max X of the frame, that max X would be the far right-hand side, I'm going to set the X value to a minus 60. Let's bring back over on the left. Then, when we start moving the goose, I added 2 methods here, or two conditionals, to make sure he doesn't go above the top or below the bottom. And here I'm simply looking at what the Y value is in comparison to that animation field. And on the Y, I looked at the floor, because we actually used the animation field on the floor up here. So here I set the ceiling equal to a hard number, The floor I calculated. The ceiling probably is always going to be 0. So if I run this on an iPad, the floor might change. Or on a different iPhone, it might change, but the ceiling's always going to be 0. So that's going to control the goose. Then I added buttons. And so there's a couple buttons here that we added. Let me go back to the storyboard. So I started by adding a pause button. And the pause button, I set the text to pause. I don't think I really changed much else here. We can make this a little bit fancier, give it a background, and so forth. So that's really all I did. I made it wide enough that this could change to resume. Probably plenty wide at this point. Make it a little bit smaller. And then I created an action for that. I'm going to go back to the code. So we already created an outlet for it before, because I want to be able to change the name. So I need an outlet. And then here is the action for that button. So named it pause, resume, action. If the current title equals pause, I'm going to get rid of my timer. I'm going to kill the timer by invalidating it. And I'm going to set the title to resume. So if it's resume, it's going to run the else fork. In the else fork, I'm going to create a new timer. I'm going to start all over again and set the title now to pause. So if we run this, notice the change to resume. I've now destroyed my timer. When I click resume, I create a new timer and just kind of pick up right where we left off. Then I added the up-down buttons. These took a little bit of work. I had to kind of figure out how to best do this. And each of the buttons actually have 2 actions. One is a touch down inside. So I created a function called, and this was the down button, down, touch down. And so here, I was also checking to see if we'd hit the bottom. And if we hit the bottom, I'm going to add 15 to the Y, or set goose move Y to 15. That's going to move him down 15 units. Now here's the problem. In the animation, that gets set in, here we're setting the animation here to goose move Y. That gets set here and he continues to move downward. If he hits the bottom, I want to set that to 0. So I've got two fail safes here to make sure it doesn't go below the bottom. When I let go of the mouse button though, I want to turn that 15 off. And so I also have a move down here where I set the goose move Y to 0. So he stops moving downward. Basically did the same thing for the up button. For the up, I've got an up touch down. So touching down inside, gonna make sure it doesn't go above. And here I'm doing a minus of goose move Y. So he's moving upward and then set it to 0. And that is our animation sequence. So if we play it again, I can move him up or I can move it down. And I guess if I just move up a little bit, I can just do it with like 1 click at a time because it's setting back to 0 every time I let go of the mouse. If I hold it down, like on the down button, it just continues to do it.
When you set the action, did you, you know how we could change on sender or whatever? Did you change any of those?
Yeah, so let me show you what I did. So let me go back to bring up my storyboard here. And I probably need to also then bring up the view controller. So what I did, actually, we can probably just click on these. You can see them. Move this over. So on the pause button, all I did was just a touch up inside. On the down, we look at the connections. So I have an up, I have a touch down, which is my up touch down method. And then I have a touch up inside, which is the move up. Kind of a misname, this should have been stop move, probably is what I should have named it. So if I can control click on that, you can see that here as well. So on each of these, what I did is I, of course, dragged over, and I chose for the down touchdown, I made that a touchdown.
Right.
So it's pushing on the button. That's going to start the animation cabin going downward. And then on the other one, I used a touch up inside. That's going to be the move up here, which makes it back to 0. I'd probably suggest naming that to stop move or something, or stop moving up. Actually, I should say this one was not the move down, it was the up touchdown.
Okay, thank you, because I figured if we're doing this, we would have to change something about the action.
So both of those have a touch down and a touch up inside. They don't have a touch down inside and a touch down outside, because technically you can't touch down inside or outside a button. You only touch down inside a button, but you can move your finger outside the button when you do the touch up. That's why there's a touch up inside and a touch up outside. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the iOS app development cohort playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos that I create, you can click my picture up in the top right and subscribe to the channel.